Welcome to Kasa Connect. Together we're exploring the journeys of entrepreneurs, creatives and change makers shaping the future.
I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but I'm sure everyone already knows who you are.
Okay. Who there's like a bunch of you on the incubator and the programs. Who isn't familiar too much with what I've done or is new to like BHQ and stuff? Okay, cool, completely. Okay, so you get the life story then. Okay, so I run BHQ, which is the largest organisation for Asian heritage, high growth startup founders and investors in the UK. So what we've done now is we've got about 8,000 people to come to our events in the last couple of years. About 250-ish people who've been through our programs. That's Incubator, which is what some people are on here. We've got state school programs that's helping kids from underrepresented, underprivileged backgrounds to get work experience in an office. We teach them how to go about starting a problem, how to research it, how to come up with a solution. They pitch to us at the end. Then on the resources side, so we've got our podcast Startups Inside Out, which is 267 episodes in. But before that, I had 2 other podcasts as well. So altogether, I'm 430 podcasts in. I've got the book, Startups for Outsiders. And then we also released a report last week in Parliament, which is the state of Asian funding. So that's a kind of general business side. Then background was to be a tech consultant, started writing online in January 2020 as a New Year's resolution. That blew up, so I was able to quit my job for that 1.5 years later. And a series of twists and turns led to where I am today. But that's a kind of general overview about going into like my entire life story.
Amazing, thank you. I want to move up. There's 2 seats here, there's more seats here. If you want to move up, feel free. You guys all good? Okay, amazing. So I've got this lovely book in front of me, Startup for Outsiders. I want to crack on with this book. What was the moment you realized, you need to write a book, and why did you pick this topic and, whatever you've written in this book?
Sure, so I didn't realise we were recording, so then that last bit was quite funny then. So Startups for Outsiders, right? The general idea is that I come from a background, nothing to do with startups at all. I was just some random kid from Ilford, and then a series of random events led me down to being quite a big, prominent figure in the UK tech ecosystem, right? So my frustration is that I constantly see people from backgrounds where maybe they are able to access things that I wasn't able to access, and they get ahead, whilst many talented people who maybe don't have access, they don't have the right network, who fall behind because they just don't have the foundational knowledge to succeed in this world. So the idea behind the book was, how do I put that in a way that's easy to understand, accessible, and also trustable, right? Because right now you can use AI, you can use these different things to learn, but do you trust it? And why a book format? So again, my background was I started writing online, that I did very well. And what I did in that period before BHQ was founded was that I ghostwrote a lot. So I've written for like over 100 founders, I've ghostwritten some book proposals, I've done a lot of that stuff, which means that I can write a book much faster than everybody else can, or most other people can. So I wrote this in 5 weeks flat, which includes a week for research, 2 weeks of writing the initial draft, then rewriting the entire thing in a week, and then 1 week of beta reading.
Did you get any sleep in those 5 weeks?
Yeah, plenty of sleep. It's fine. I mainly slept, to be honest.
My favorite part is actually the title. I find the title really, really powerful. What does being an outsider mean to you, and why did you pick that in particular?
I was surprised that nobody had taken it yet, to be honest. When when you're thinking of ideas and you're kind of daydreaming, then when I Googled, it's like someone's surely done this before. And the domain was free, everything was open. So if you want to get the book, you can literally just go to startupsforoutsiders.com. But the whole idea was like, how do you take what we've got but then make it accessible? Because the community itself, BHQ, is for Asian heritage founders. But all the stuff I teach, you don't have to be Asian to learn from it, right? So I put it into that lens. I'm cutting off a huge amount of the audience who could benefit from it. And there's different words I played around with, right? What's the right word for it? Because everyone considers it in different ways. And one of the good things about the word outsider is that people can consider themselves outsiders for all different reasons, right? Whether it's their gender, whether it's their race, whether it's their socioeconomic background. And it's a word that people can associate themselves with based on how they feel, as opposed to a particular demographic that defines them. And there can be people from like very privileged backgrounds who maybe suffer from like neurodegenerative diseases, or they have disabilities that maybe people don't see, and they still suffer from the same feeling that other people do, but maybe people don't really recognize that. So that feeling of being an outsider can be, anybody can feel like an outsider.
Yeah. And if there's one idea you want someone to take away from this book, what would it be?
I think one of the biggest ones is that everyone puts other people on a pedestal. So I've interviewed, it's 400 podcasts in now, right? Every single one of those people have their own problems, have their own insecurities, they have their own worries. And what we can do is we can idolize these people and think like, oh, I can never be like that. And as soon as you think like that, you won't be able to do it. So the big thing about this book is that you can do it. You just have the right skill set. You need to know the right foundational knowledge, and also the right mindset of like, do you actually want to do this? Yeah. Because if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, then again, like, it's not really going to make you happy. So the big idea from the book is just, it is accessible to you. There are people from your background, whatever your background is, who've been able to achieve whatever you want to achieve.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the wrong reasons, like being cool and, trying to make money really quickly. How do you come up with those reasons and decide, okay, these are the wrong reasons to start a business?
So sheer experience, right, is that the nature of what I do means that I probably talk to about 1,000 people a week. So if I see you and I forget you, that's why, because my brain's just mush all the time. And it's really hard to kind of juggle that, because I have such a huge amount of inbound messaging into my brain, right? So I need to try and then, how do I make that accessible to other people? So looking at those wrong reasons is that what I'm doing, and it's with those episodes, is I'm constantly judging people, right? There's no point pretending otherwise. I'm trying to work out, is this person authentic and genuine? Or are they doing it for reasons which may be a bit more toxic or a bit more coming from a bad place? And when you see people trying to do it to be cool, what you then see is the decay of what happens over time to them, where they aren't getting the validation they wanted and how that affects them. And I've seen a lot of those kind of negative stories too. So if I can help people not take that path because they think it's going to solve something for them that it's not, then I think that's doing something good too, right? Because it's not just about everyone should start a company, because it might not be right for you. But if by reading this book you decide, oh, that's really interesting, but I'm never starting a company, if that saves you years of heartache, that's a good thing too.
Yeah. And I know there's a couple of people in the audience that said they're interested in the startup world and are looking to enter. So what do you think might surprise them when they read this book?
I think the big thing that a lot of people get wrong is that everybody focuses on the idea rather than the problem. And when you watch Dragon's Den or you watch like Apprentice, it's all about like, the magical idea. When in reality in startups, like, usually your first idea is wrong. And usually your ideas suck at the beginning. So if you look at history, right, so you have Instagram was a check-in app, and then they discovered actually people want to share photos of their friends. YouTube was a video dating app, and then they decided actually people want to share cat videos instead. So people are always wrong at the beginning, but if you go into startups with this idea of like, this is the solution I'm going to do and everybody's going to love it, you're probably going to be wrong, and then you're going to cling on too long. Whereas if you go into the idea of like, okay, I want to serve these people, how do I serve them best? And then you're constantly talking to customers, you're constantly understanding their problems, that's much more likely to lead to success down the line, because you're obsessed with the problem rather than the solution.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we actually had 2 people in the audience with the exact same question when they signed up, which is, should they be building in public? Is it important to be building in public?
So this one might surprise people as well, because with what I do, so I'm very public, but at the same time, I don't advise that for everybody. And building in public is just a distribution channel. It's just a technique, but it's not necessarily the best technique for everybody. And when it comes to building in public, it's looking at what's the strategy, like what's your unfair advantage. If your unfair advantage, for example, is you're building a biotech and you're going to have this unique virus formula, if you're building in public and telling people what experiments you're doing, that's bad, because then they can then replicate it. Whereas if you're building in public and it's something where it's more human related or it's more consumer related, the fact you're building in public builds a reputation which could work for you. But there is no right or wrong answer. It's more about your personality and what works for you. And this is where you need to look at different examples of different people to see what's working. And the harsh truth is too, a lot of people you see on LinkedIn or you see on Instagram who are building in public, they're obsessed with the fame of what they're building and like how they look successful. Whereas I might know their revenue and know they're not actually selling any of their product. So sometimes, again, harsh reality is that the correlation between people who look successful versus people who actually are successful on social media isn't always like as close of a correlation do you think it is?
Yeah, we actually had a really good question by, I don't know if Noor's here, but he asked, how do you set expectations and mindset between the glamour of entrepreneurship and social media versus the real work behind it?
This is a hard thing because you want to encourage people to do it, but at the same time, they've got to know what they're getting into. And I think with like the podcast, obviously you have the same thing. It's like I try to drill down and say, what's the actual hard moments and what makes it worth it? Because if it is a case of like you're really motivated by getting really rich really quickly, then actually a startup isn't necessarily the best way to do it because most startups are going to fail. If you go and take your 400k a year salary in San Francisco to working for engineers at Google, that's probably going to get to a good level quicker. And when it's that glamour side, I say there's like the good reasons of doing it, right? One is that you're obsessed with the problem, where this just really matters to you, and that's a burning desire in you, and then you're just going to love what you're doing every day, right? The other is that you just got that mentality where you just like trying to solve hard things. And I would say that I'm a bit of both, but a lot of my life is actually, I just like doing hard stuff. And you can see a pattern in my life of where I take on these challenges which other people think are crazy, because that's what makes me feel alive and what I really enjoy. And even then as well, because there's this stupid idea where people say like, oh, if you find something you love, you never
work a day in your life.
That's absolute, can I swear?
Yeah,
that's absolute bullshit, right? There's always like some like drama or something going on, right? It's like, yeah, I love what I do, but there's some days where I have to like deal with so much crap, and you're just like, oh, I wish I just had a job.
Yeah.
And that what it does, it sets this unrealistic expectation that everything's always perfect and fine and dandy, and it's just not. And I know very few entrepreneurs who are say 5 years in, 10 years in, who will say that kind of thing. Which are like people maybe very early in their career who will say those things, and it's just because they haven't yet got to that stage where the honeymoon phase is over. And what really determines your success is, can you get through those hard moments rather than when everything is going well?
That leads me to my next question. What do you think is something that someone might underestimate that you've written in the book until they actually experience it?
I think rejection. Because so many people, they try to showcase it, so everything always going well on social media. And you've got to think about the incentive structure, right? Is that if you're building a business, then you want everybody to think you're doing well, because then that gets more customers, it gets you investors. But then some of those people are hiding the challenges. And what you then find out is people say 5 years on, but actually admit, oh, actually I got rejected by 100 investors. But they won't say that while they're fundraising, right? That's about, oh, they'll get so much traction, everybody loves what they're doing. And that's the problem, is that why, for example, I tend to interview people at a later stage, because they no longer need to prove themselves. Whereas people at the earlier stage, they have to build the hype because they're trying to make it, right? They're trying to hustle. And when you go through that, it's just that idea of like, you have to be very careful about who you're paying attention to as well.
And I want to move a little bit away from the book, because you also have your incubator program, emphasis on the bay within it. I love that. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I know there's a few people who've joined it, and a lot of people are curious about this startup school you're building.
Yeah, and again, it all comes down to like talking to the community, right? Understanding what do people want. And what we found is there's so many people who they just don't know how to get started, and it's like they're talented, they have skills, but it's just that bit of a startup life still feels so alien to them.
Yeah.
And through the incubator, what you can do is you can give people that safe space to test things out, to like understand what it is and whether it's the right fit or not. Because there's so much hype on LinkedIn and so much hype on social media that it's really easy to get lost in it. Whereas the idea behind the incubator is, how do I help people at scale? Because like, as people know, this might be some people I've done this to here, is where people ask me for coffee, I always say no, because I just can't scale one-to-one coffees. And when the community is like over 10,000, 15,000 people, imagine if I said yes to every person asking me for coffee, I'd just be wired all the time. So through the incubator, it can be a more structured program. And because of the amount of data I have from people in the past, I can then understand what's the biggest issues that I see people don't understand. And I can then make the workshops about that. And then also give them the assignments based on, what do I know when people are pitching me for investment that usually they're getting wrong. So like, spoilers, the first week is going to be about that problem, and I'm really nailing down, is this a problem worth solving? Because so many people, when they pitch their idea, and I ask them like, oh, like, what do the customers say? And they don't know. And the worst thing you can do to me if you're trying to ask me for investment is ask me if I think it's a good idea. You should be telling me it's a good idea, because you've talked to 100 customers and they've told you like how much they need this product. And that's the bit that people get wrong. So don't seek validation from somebody like me. Me telling you your idea is good if I'm not a customer is basically useless. You need to be telling me that your idea is good because you've talked to the customers and you know the problem better than I do. And like that's something I can invest in. I can't invest in you if you're asking me for, is this a good idea?
Yeah, you support so many people, and I'm sure you also have your own kind of personal business streams. So how do you keep the balance between actually helping other people, because that also fulfills you, I'm guessing, and building your own business?
I don't sleep very much. So what we do with the BHQ, right, is there's been so much experimentation.
Yeah.
So this is quite a funny thing that people, like, I hope nobody actually does this because it would be quite disturbing. But if you look through we used to do quarterly episodes of what the BHQ is doing and like what our plans are. And if you listen to what I said a year ago, like I'm not doing any of that stuff. And like you have this thing of it's one of the great things about entrepreneurship. You have constant delusion of like, oh, this is like what I'm going to do. And usually we don't do it. But it's constant experimentation. And now we're at a stage, so the 3-year anniversary is tomorrow, so it's our birthday tomorrow. And at that stage, we're more mature now, right? We've had more data, we understand ourselves better. And this is where the programs come into play. Because earlier I was just going for coffee with everybody. I used to go for like 100 coffees a month. But I can't do that forever. So with the programs, you can really make it so that it's a defined amount of time that I'm spending on these things. And what I try to do as much as I can to do the scalable stuff. So I spend 5 weeks writing a book that can help unlimited people. Whereas if I did the coffees, then it's each time I'm repeating myself over and over and over again. So it's working out how do I spend my time doing things that are scalable. So for example, a podcast, sit here once and record this. People can listen to it forever. And those are ways I try and work things out, is that one-to-one help. If I'm an investor in you, fair enough. If it's just every single person who needs help, it's never going to work.
Yeah. I guess this comes from a personal kind of need to ask you this, but what's the hardest truth you learned about building a community? Because that's currently what I'm trying to do with Kasa. It's all about community building. So building a community that's scalable.
So one of the biggest things is you got to be very wary of compliments. So when we're doing well, everybody's always like, oh, you're doing so amazing. Like, I'd love to support you, anything I can do. When people, the biggest lie in any of this world, right, is like, anything I can do to help, let me know. Because it's not, right? It's like, obviously people have their own things, but their sentiment is like, oh, I'd love to help. But in reality, like, they're busy with their own lives, they've got their own priorities. But if you start believing that, when people say that, you're going to really screw yourself over. Because you think that everybody's going to come around you, they're going to prioritize you. When in reality, like, maybe they've got sickness, maybe they've got kids, maybe they've got parents that are unwell, like, you're not their number one priority. So you've got to be very careful when people say kind of blank check style statements. And what we did in the past is we were a bit too trusting. We were like, oh, these people are going to save us. As I know, we have to be very much focused on how do we make it sustainable and look after ourselves.
Yeah.
And like earlier this year, well, this time last year, we thought, okay, we've got 2 massive sponsorships coming in. We're sorted. We did a new hire. We got a new bigger office. And then both those deals fell through because it's too much based on trust. And that's a maturity aspect of over time. We have to work out, okay, how do you make sure that we're looking after ourselves? Because we can't rely on everybody to look after us otherwise you're just always on that brink of going bankrupt, right?
Yeah.
And I would say for the first, 4 or 5 months of this year, every single month's like, how are we going to pay rent? How are we going to do this? So when people see what's going on right now, it's very easy for them to just forget about the hard time.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't forget that, right? I remember, okay, when there was a hard time, who stood up, who actually helped us, versus who said like, oh, anything I can do to help, let me know.
Yeah.
And then didn't come through.
I want to know how you actually dealt with that when the 2 big sponsors pulled out. What was your mindset? Were you resilient because you already learned that that's important? How did you deal with that?
It's a lot easier to talk about being resilient than to actually be resilient.
Yeah.
And the thing is, so for those people who don't know as well, so when BHQ started, it was initially meant to be like a little side thing. My dad passed away just before we were going to launch it. So that flipped this from something which was a little side project to now being wrapped up in like my dad's legacy and like how I viewed myself and like whether I'm a good person. Like there was a very complicated set of emotions that came out of that. So no matter what happens with BHQ, it's going to survive because I have a compulsion to make it survive.
Yeah.
And that changes things, right? Where I'm in a financial position where I could like personally back the company and keep it alive. I could personally pay salaries, which nobody is in. So in that moment, when like everything's hitting the fan, I was never doubting that it's going to survive. I was very annoyed at different things happening, but at the same time, like, there's never a doubt in my head. And like, even you see how I talk, and like, you can look back the entire time at BHQ. You never see me say like doubt at all about, oh, is it going to survive? Is it going to work out? because I have that self-confidence, self-belief. So like, no, it's going to work out. I'm just going to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. Nice. And onto the book again, because I'm just really curious. Is there a second book coming along?
So yeah, I don't think I've announced this yet. We'll talk to you about this. So strategically, right, is with a book. Okay. So those of you startup founders in the audience, right? So you've got like lifetime value. So one book is £15. If I then do a series of books and people like the first book, I'm increasing the lifetime value. So if I can write a book my first book I could write in 5 weeks, next time I can write it quicker. So if I can have startups for outsiders, then I can have different chapters in the book that I know are popular. I can then expand them to full books. So there's going to be networking for outsiders. There's going to be fundraising for outsiders. There's going to be startups for insiders. When I get some time in my life to actually write it, I'll do it. But the idea behind that is like they then, like if people like one book, it then continues on from that. And it's even, for example, and some of the other things you've been mentioning is like, this is like a long-term project of, there's a strategy behind it that isn't necessarily about how to make the biggest bang at the beginning. What I could do with the book, and it's like the tactics I've used and how I published this is because of what my background is. So if somebody's trying to replicate that, then it might not be the best tactic for them.
Yeah.
And that's the nuance of working out what's best for you. And I think whenever it's like a one-size-fits-all approach, that's never usually the best approach. So what I can do with the book is that, say for example, I give a lot of talks, right? So I'm giving a talk at a venture capital fund on Friday, and then they're buying the book for everybody in the audience. So I can bulk sell the book quite easily. So for example, I know there's some people ask about the book cover, and why haven't I made it more fancy? Because I don't need to as well, right? And part of that is like, I'm not trying to do a mass sale from like ads or stuff like that. When I start doing ads on Amazon, then I will have to update the book cover. But right now it's about looking in a way that's like slick, professional and simple. And even when I did the book cover, there's some maths behind it. So what I did is the top 30 books, business books on Amazon. I took screenshots of all of their covers. I then put it into Figma. So Figma is a design software. And then I was comparing, okay, how are they all mapped out? Because many of you think like, oh, why isn't there a picture on the cover? But if you look at the top 30 books, most of them don't have a picture. Most of them are simple images. If you look at, say, for example, I think it was The Intelligent Investor, right? If you look at that and look at my cover, it's basically exactly the same layout of where the titles are. And that's what I've done. It's like, it's pattern matching, which is more subconscious, based on other things in that genre. Because it's not a book it's like not a fantasy book, right? It doesn't need to have a dragon on the front cover. And if I was to try and get this into, say, bookstores and stuff in the future, then I can get updated then.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to waste so much time on the book cover, which isn't really that important for that beginning stages. Most people buying the book know who I am. So they're only buying the book if they already trust me. And then the book cover isn't as important. So there's like tactics behind it. And I could very easily delay the launch by like, okay, I need to find a perfect book cover. And it's like the classic thing is when people start a business and they think about their logo. Their logo is like not very important. Like BayHQ's logo changed after the first couple of years. There's going to be some people who remember that. Yeah. Most people have forgotten, even if they were around. The original logo was like, I did in like half a day. It was like a red circle with like the BayHQ in the middle. Yeah. And then we kind of dropped the, so we did the Facebook thing, right? So it's not the Facebook, now it's just BayHQ rather than the BayHQ.
I like it better.
Yeah. And it's just simple things like that, but it didn't matter at the beginning. It's much more about our reputation, about our trust. And people can over-index on the way something looks or the design aspects. Yeah. But the design aspects only work if people like you in the first place.
Does this fall in your top 3 proudest achievements? I know you've done so much, but would you count it as up there?
What am I proud of? So this is one of the hard things about what I do, right? So in the last month, we've had the book launch, we've had the report launch, and the incubator launch. So since we published a book, I've actually spent very little time thinking about the book, which is that weird thing where for most people it's like defining life achievement. With me, it's like, oh yeah, I did that in summer, right?
You grouped it up with your report launch, which we are going to touch on, by the way.
Yeah.
There were some questions on that.
So is it top 3? I would say maybe not, because I think like there's going to be a book. This is like a tactical book, right? Yeah. This is a book about, it's very useful, it's very helpful to people. But the book which I do later on in life, which is much more personal, that one's going to throw a lot more emotion behind it, right? Because my original writing was actually nothing to do with startups. It was more about mindset, about how to deal with the different struggles, how to avoid, like, if you're very ambitious, how do you manage that and how do you stay sane amongst that? Yeah. So when I write that book about priorities and how to like think about life and that kind of more philosophical book, which like sometimes people don't realize, like, well, all my writing was philosophical to begin with.
Yeah.
That's a book that's probably going to be the really impactful one, where it's much more meat, whereas this book is information.
Yeah. And your top writing on Medium was the other stuff as well, right? The more emotional stuff. So it only makes sense that you include a book on that. But to your thing on the report, because that's something you've done this week, you did the State of Asian Funding report and presented it in Parliament. Someone actually asked in the audience for some insights on, how you found that. And where do you see, funding going?
So that was emotional, that thing, because what we had we had the State of Asian Funding report launched in Parliament. And what we had is our board members are speaking, people who've been through our programs are speaking. And I didn't know what they were going to say. But then one of the students from one of the schools, she got up on stage and she said how it was a highlight of her summer and how she learned so much and thank you to us. And you're sitting on the side of the stage, I was actually tearing up because it's just, you don't expect him to see that impact. That matters to me way more than the followers and all that other crap, right? And comes from my motivation because it comes from that internal scorecard, right? Of, am I actually helping people or am I just some figure online, right? And with that report, so it's something which we always wanted to do. And then we got the partnerships on board to make it happen. And it's just something which it's a long-term project. It's a massive pain, right?
Did you get sponsors for that or was it out of your pocket?
Yeah, so the data was from Bohurst, so shout out to them giving us free data. Then we had HSBC Innovation Banking, we had Jolson, our legal partner, and there was Mercy Ventures.
Yeah.
And then there was Tech Nation as well supported it. So that meant that we could fund it, because obviously you haven't spent a lot of time on this report. And then we had volunteers too, so shout out to Uzma, Malaika, and Arshween as well, giving more shouts here. But it's being able to do that together and working out how do you structure it, because it's a bit of a touchy subject, right? Is the funding towards Asians, what defines Asians? We use the UN definition of Asian, then nobody can cancel me, hopefully.
What is the UN definition of Asian?
So it's the countries they include.
Okay.
So it's a list of countries which count as Asian.
Okay.
Because otherwise people would be like, oh, but I'm Asian or I'm not Asian, and just the UN says you're Asian, so I'm following that. And I know people now argue the UN too, but it's just I'm outsourcing the responsibility for that, right? Okay. And then it's looking at, how do you spice this up? Yeah. And also how do they identify who's Asian, who isn't? Yeah. So it's looking at, their name. It's can you just assume because they've got Patel in their name, they're Asian or not? These kind of things, right? And you're trying to use different mechanisms try and improve it. And then, for example, some people, one of the hardest things is people who've got Arab names. Yeah. Because they could be, say, Tunisian or Moroccan or Egyptian, or they could be, say, Lebanese or Saudi Arabian. So it's I was kind of talking to people I know, from those areas, can you help me decipher what's what? And it's not very easy. So you have to reach out to these people, and then it's a kind of a weird dynamic, right? Yeah. But
interesting.
A lot of lessons from this first one. And in terms of conclusions, so 6.8% of funding went to all Asian founding teams in the UK, but only 0.2% went to teams where all of the founders are Asian women. And that was the more stark stat. But when you actually look at it as well, it's in line. So 2% of funding in Europe went to all female founding teams. And then Asians are 10% of the UK population, so 10% of 2% is 0.2%.
Is it because there's just less women entrepreneurs, or is it because less funding is going to women? Do you know that percentage of the women who are actually applying for funding?
So this is the challenge. So there are some stats on this, but a lot of times, a lot of people just get missed through the cracks, right?
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult to know who's applied for funding or who's gone to pitch and hasn't got it, because that data that isn't really stored. What we're starting to do now, we're going to start tracking ourselves of when people submit the pitch deck to us. We can then see how do they then do, and we start to try and work out, if we're mainly capturing a lot of these people, for example, our own programs, so we know in our program we have roughly half women and men. What's happening to those people? Are they raising funding? Are they not? And the difficulty is too, for example, let's say 5% of the UK population is Asian women. The stats are about how many are actively part of the workforce, how many of them are looking to build a business, how many of them looking to build a startup as well, is different things. Yeah. So the idea then is it's kind of we can do more work on that, really deciphering that down, but you can never really be perfect about it.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. And I'm going to close off with Tanushrie's question, who's part of your program, and then I'll open it for more questions. For founders without a tech or finance background, what's the smartest way to build early credibility with investors and partners?
So one of the big things, I guess it's another big point I think people often forget, is like, everyone thinks of a founder as like a solo thing. Most companies that do well have got multiple founders. So if you don't have a tech background, make friends with somebody who's got a tech background, and you can be the other person, right? So you look at many CEOs and different people.
Yeah.
What we always think about the star person who's always out in front, right? Say, for example, with us. With BHQ, I'm generally the person in front of the camera. But like Gervy does a lot of the actual work, right? He's the one who's doing the partnership meetings. He's the one that is doing the investment stuff. And that's often lost because we have this whole pedestal aspect, right? Like say with most companies, we always like idolize Steve Jobs, but he couldn't have done it without his co-founder. Bill Gates had a co-founder. And when you think about this too, it's like, how do you make traction or how do you get investors to like you?
Yeah.
They're judging your team, they're judging all of the co-founders together and how you are cohesive to each other, as opposed to just your own qualities.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a popping the bubble thing here, right? It's not just about you, it's about the team. And how I look at that too is like, okay, if you know that you don't have a tech background or you don't have a finance background, work with somebody who does. And you can be exceptional, right? Some people are just, one example I have is Sandrine Zhang. So she founded Interior. So she was a non-technical founder who taught herself how to code. She built the initial platform. And then once she got to a certain amount of revenue, then she started hiring a developer team. So there are solo founders who can be truly exceptional, teach themselves all these skills, and then go on to do really well. But if you find a co-founder to fill a gap who you get along with, it makes the journey a bit less lonely too.
There was actually a question on how to find a co-founder and whether it's important to find one. So I guess this is a good time to ask that as well.
So in terms of co-founders, right? It's better to have no co-founder than to have a bad one.
Yeah.
But it's better to have a good co-founder than to not have a co-founder, right? So it's all human dynamics, right? It's not just co-founder good, no co-founder bad. It's more complicated than that, because a lot of people I know, so say the 5 years from the company, they don't have the right co-founder dynamics. They can get to several million in revenue, but they start hating each other, and then the company then crumbles, right? Because you can have millions in revenue. If you don't exit, you don't actually have any money because you're just spending on your staff and spending on other things. And that's a really important thing about that alignment. And something which isn't talked about enough, right? It's like you can get to millions of revenue, you get your Series A, you can get your Series B. If you don't exit and you're not paying yourself properly, it's an adventure, but you don't actually make that much money. So looking at co-founder, so one is, like, for example, I couldn't do what I do without my co-founder, right? So shout out to him. But it was very organic, right? It was a friend of, so me and his wife used to be in the same bungalow team 10 years ago. That's how we know each other, right? And
we're also going to make you do some bungalow, by the way.
So when you're looking to like how to find a co-founder, right? One is like just get yourself out there.
Yeah.
But it's also looking at, okay, who's building stuff that you enjoy. Like there's different programs. So you've got like EF, so Entrepreneurs First, you've got Y Combinator. They have different platforms like that too. But the big idea is really like, you need to know what's the gaps you're missing. And often what happens is there's 2 silos, right? There's people who are technical founders and non-technical founders. And then people who are technical founders hang around with other technical founders, and people who are non-technical founders hang out with other non-technical founders. And it's like, well, that's not how you're going to find a co-founder, right? So somebody earlier mentioned about they went to like an event by AWS. So if you want to find a technical co-founder, go to developer places. Go to where the developers are hanging out, the software engineers. Don't go to a place where other non-technical founders are hanging out. That's not how you're going to find your gap. And the same thing with a software developer. If you want to start building a company, the way you go and do that is you go to the events with general CEO kind of style founders and you chat to them and see what they're trying to build. And if you like it, then do a project. And I always say as well, think about it as a project as opposed to becoming co-founder straight away. Because some people like to love to jump the gun, right? It's like, okay, you're now a co-founder. So congratulations, you don't even know if you like each other. So doing a project first can really help out, because those dynamics, like if you actually work them together, it's going to bring out all those different frictions and stuff. Because often people at the beginning, you're just naturally nicer to people because you're in the honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
What happens after the honeymoon? What happens when you're annoyed? What happens when you've had a bad day? Are you going to take on your co-founder, or are you going to be a bit more like understanding of their situation?
And I guess a lot of that advice is captured in here. So if you are building, I think that's too. There we go. I mean, open to you guys. If you guys have any questions, please.
So on the road of co-founders, how do you decide that it's the right time to actually bring a co-founder on board?
So the best time to have a co-founder is before you get too far in, because then the challenge is always, if somebody didn't actually found it with you, there's kind of a weird resentment thing going on, right? Of like, is this really theirs too? And the earlier you can get somebody on board is generally the better, because if you're going to call them a co-founder, but you're like, well, it's my company really, it's just like something unsaid. So generally, as I always say, if you can find the co-founder early, it's better. Especially like before you're revenue generating. If you're generating quite a lot of revenue, then you're like, well, they don't deserve to be a co-founder because I'm making like all this money by myself. And whenever there's an argument or like things aren't going too well, that's going to come out. And it's also, you can bring somebody on board as a leader who's not a co-founder. And I always find it really funny when somebody comes to a company like 4 years later and they call themselves a co-founder. So like Elon Musk at Tesla, right? Elon Musk didn't found Tesla. He joined later on, and then he's now calling himself the founder because he got as a title. Yeah. But he wasn't the guy who made it.
I didn't know this.
So there's a long backstory and history and drama behind this. But it's all these different things going on, right? So when you think about co-founders, like, there's reached a certain stage where it might already be best to call somebody a co-founder. And also, if somebody joins 3 years into a company, then it's like, why do they want to be called a co-founder? Like, what is that? Like an ego thing, or why is it? Because you can be a CEO without being a co-founder. And I know many great CEOs who aren't.
I can back that from personal experience. When I started Kasa, I couldn't find anyone to do it with. I wanted to do it solo as well. But first year in, when it was getting tough to do everything myself and I was looking for someone to manage operations and finance, I thought a co-founder would be better than hiring someone, again, from the payment perspective, right? But at that point, it was just really hard because I have a different vision. I've already built it to a certain level. And so, at that point, I was just like, you know what, I can't bring on another co-founder. It needs to be, an employee at that point.
You can also give an employee equity, right? Yeah. So you can bring on a CEO and you can get equity options. It's just that title is like an interesting human dynamic and human psychology, right? Because like I know loads of CEOs who come on after they've raised 5 million, 10 million, but they don't demand to be called a co-founder, and they're very happy and there's like, I'm here to manage, but I'm not the founder, and they're not trying to claim that. And again, there's nothing wrong with somebody who wants to be called a co-founder. But the other challenge too is where if you spent like most of the time so far building the company and it's still at a very early stage. So if you, for example, just random numbers here, let's say you're at 10K a month revenue, but you want to get to 100K a month revenue, then bringing somebody on board and calling them a co-founder, well, they're going to help you do the hardest part, right? So that's fine. Whereas if you're actually got all the motions in gear and things are working well, then maybe there shouldn't be a co-founder.
You had a question?
I had a question.
Sorry, he had his hand up really first.
Sorry. At that point when you started A, by the way, fantastic, thank you very much. You said you had self-belief. So how to differentiate your self-belief from being delusional? Because you didn't have traction, but you knew the game, the ropes maybe. How do you build that self-belief as well before you find trusted?
So my analogy here, which I really like, I don't know if it makes any sense to anybody else, is like egg confidence and avocado confidence. So egg confidence is that you got a hard outer shell, right? So you look confident, but if you squeeze it, resist a bit, you squeeze it a bit more and it's just goo in your hand. Whereas an avocado is a bit rough on the outside, you squeeze it, it's going to go very quickly, but this core is very strong and you can replant that core. Okay, so it's looking at what type of confidence is it? Is it that like the outer shell, or is it actually the core? And with me, for example, where I developed that confidence from is my background before this. And it's something which I struggle with, like, how do you build that confidence? Because I was national for karate. I danced nationally like Bhangra. I've done lots of different things that are very difficult. So I did 12 obstacle course races across the world. I've got a muscle and a history of proving to myself I can do very hard things. And that's why I can take that mentality across. But also then, like you said, looking from that more practical perspective is that I knew that I had runway where, because the money made in the past, I could bankroll BHQ for a decent amount of time by myself if I needed to. And that's a privilege. And I'm trying to be quite open about that. It's like, I could take a bigger risk than other people could because I had money. I made the money myself, but still, if you don't know that bit about it, then it's not fair for you, if you're not in that position, to compare yourself. Yeah. Because if you don't have that runway, your decisions are very different. And like, I could do that and know that, okay, if I don't earn money for the next several years, I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to be okay. So that's another thing, which is another layer. I didn't have to worry about being homeless. I didn't have to worry about could I pay rent. I knew that I could make that. And when you think about like, are you delusional or is it a self-confidence? It comes down to like the conversation with the customers. Because if you keep talking to customers, they keep saying that they need what you need, then it validates it, right? Whereas if it's just like you're ignoring, like you're constantly getting negative signals from everybody else, but it's only you that believes in it, then that's where it's like, okay, is this now a delusion? And what I struggle with, because of the way I think, the mindset is like, I always take on the challenge, but then having a co-founder is then also useful because then I also have to think about his situation, how his life is, and then that can help ground it because it's not just about me. I have to think about, okay, what's his circumstances? How does this make sense there as well? So having that dynamic of like two different people where you're then also looking out for them and you have that general empathy for the other person, that can really help. And I'm trying to think of other delusion tests what you got, right? So one is like setting yourself a target. So saying, okay, if I don't get this done by this stage, then that's the mark. And like you set yourself a target. If you can't hit that thing, then okay, you're not as good as you think you are. And it's kind of a harsh thing to think about, but you can't keep making excuses. Okay, this is my target. Put it in, like write it down. And if you don't hit it, then okay, cool, we've got to think of a different path here. Because there's the whole thing, like, if you know you're not hitting your target and it's written down, you can't really ignore that too much. You can ignore it, but that's going to help you, right? It's like if you've got a set thing, if I don't hit this amount of revenue by this time, that means that this idea isn't as good as I think it is, or my execution isn't as good as I think it is, and I've got to pivot or adjust.
Good.
Sorry, your question, yeah.
Yeah, mine was actually a follow-up to the founders topic. So just a little background, I started as founder at present, and I think I have this delusion, we're in the honeymoon phase right now, like I believe the idea of the company is going to be worth X massive billions in the future. Now, there's a reluctance to actually give it to someone who, or give co-founder the title, privileges to someone who I don't think is worthy of it. There's so many VCs and so much that they kind of emphasize the need to have a co-founder because it helps on days you're down and like keeping each other up. How do you, I think I'm better as a solo founder. How do you pitch that to a VC without coming across arrogant or complacent or, yeah.
Okay, so the question there was about how do you prove if you're a solo founder that you're actually capable and you're not just arrogant? And that comes down to like sheer traction. So I call it the team traction tilt. Team traction tilt, that's an alliteration, but it's if you're building a company and you don't have a background in that, right? If you get it to 100 million ARR, they can't deny you, right? You are like the shit, right? But if you don't have that kind of traction, then you've got to like look at your history, right? So when I say team traction tilt is that the team is like your history. What did you do before you started your company? And if you can say, like, for example, I'm like, oh yeah, I was national squad, I was this, I was that. I can like carry a bit of swagger around because I've got like demonstrable things that I've done in the past, which are at a very high level. If you've got that, you use that, right? If you were national level sports, if you were an Olympian, if you did something like that, if you were you've proven in some way you've done something where you are the 1% of the 1%, then you're not arrogant. You've proven it. And that's what you say, right? So there's so many entrepreneurs who've done really well who were national level at sports beforehand, or there's some kind of ridiculous thing that they've done. And that's what's going to count out, right? So there's that. If you don't have that, then you've got to prove yourself. And they're going to think you're arrogant and you're delusional unless you prove yourself. And that's where it comes out like sheer, brutal hard work is if you're saying you're the shit, you've got to prove that. And that's how you prove it. Like, it's going to come down to numbers because you can say like, oh yeah, I'm good enough to do this, prove it. And that's like people, and one thing I think I don't like sometimes about, say, investors and like the way the communication is, people won't say that to your face, but it's all about like, you've got to tell me, you can't just tell me you're good, I've got to see it. And say, for example, I know somebody who, like, I don't think it's announced yet, but they've got like investment by like Andreessen Horowitz and like early 20s. But then you look at his background I said, well, yeah, okay, I can see it because he came from a very underprivileged background, single parent household, and then he then rose to the top of his university. He was head of a student union. He was then like, all these different things he's done is that when I look at him, I talk to him like, yeah, crap, you came from nothing and you've been able to get to the top of the tree. I think you can do that in a startup environment too. And that's what it's all looking at. Have you got that in your history or not? If you don't have that in your history, it's going to be how much revenue can you smash through. If you're, it depends on what industry you're in as well. How can you prove that you can get the top team on board? So say, for example, another company is where they're doing like something to do with longevity. And one of the co-founders was a professor of longevity at King's College. So like, okay, there you go. You like, I'm not really I can't really argue that, right? So it's those kind of metrics. So awards, a lot of people over-index on awards. Most awards don't mean anything. And if people over-index on them, what then happens is to a smart investor, they're like, why do they think this award is so important? And you kind of start judging them for that. So this is the thing is about awards that stuff matters less, then what did you do to win that award? No.
Sorry, good to I thought it was really helpful. Thanks so much for sharing some of those insights from your book. Really helpful. I guess everyone's going to be thinking about writing books now, but maybe we'll get your help with that. My question was focused around, I guess there's very traditional ways of thinking about startups. So you mentioned it yourself, things around having a co-founder, things around kind of getting VC back in. I'm more interested in what are some of the non-traditional structures, methods, ways to not only build a startup, but then think about scaling that are not often talked about. But I think you talked about it yourself, right? You said you didn't necessarily go for that kind of route. So I'm just curious, what else is out there?
One of the big things that people don't pay enough attention to is grant funding, because grant funding is quite opaque in this country. But what happens if you don't go for grant funding, other people do. They're getting free money and you're not. So it's like, people are very obsessed with getting VC funding early, but like, get the grant money, get the free money, like take it. And it's something like it's frustrating. We're looking at it as like, you're chasing investor money so much when you could just actually, especially if you're doing a scientific based thing or research based thing, get the grant money in. So that's like one big thing in terms of like funding yourself. The other is service-based businesses. And this is a complicated thing, right? Because even with the incubator, some of you would have got an email from me being like, oh, I think this is a service provider business, so it's not really relevant. Because a service provider business is very different to a startup and a product-based business, because the way you have to grow it, all of those different stresses and tactics. But the actual underlying thing of you have to be able to sell, there's a lot of transferable skills. Service-based businesses are often a great way to make money, and then you can self-fund. So I know lots of people who, and again, it's not talked about enough, is like often the second tank founders, what they did is they built a service-based business first, they made loads of money, they don't really have to work again if they don't want to. So when they start their company and start their own startup, they don't have to take much investment from external sources. And they've also been able to prove they've been able to make money. So it's kind of what I talked about earlier about where to get rich quickly, a startup style business isn't necessarily the best. But the same skills, if you are shit hot, you should also be able to run a service-based business. And maybe it's actually best to do that first, make your money there, and then transfer that money and use your startup as like your second mountain of like, okay, you've made your money now. So I don't know, because where it says second mountain, so I can't remember it's by, there's like first mountain and second mountain in like philosophy. First mountain is you're chasing ego, status, money, all those things. Second mountain is more about purpose, where you're doing things because you just love it, which is really important to you. And chasing the second mountain, something before you've done the first mountain, can be really difficult because you don't have the resources. So you're chasing this dream, but you don't have the skill set, you don't have the money, you don't have the proof concepts in the past. And there's so many founders who are building startups who are actually successful, who did that service-based business first, and it's looked down upon, right? And this is the frustrating thing. But having done a service-based business first and understanding the difference between the two, then getting in a startup means that you've got way more leverage. You don't have to beg investors because you're making money on your other business. So that's another thing. A new trendy thing is seed strapping, which is the idea that you raise like one round and then you keep your costs so lean by using AI and different things, where you then don't need to go through the later rounds. So traditionally is pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B, Series C, and the Series A and B are generally
like large institutional investors. But if from that first round you can be really lean, you don't overspend your money, you only need to raise one round and then you're profitable. And that's what a lot more companies are starting to do. But it's not, it's one of the weird things about profitability is that it's actually better for you, but it's not really a headline grabbing thing. And it's much more difficult from the outside to prove. Whereas, say, for example, when we cover things, when we get people on the podcast, it's very easy for you to check if somebody's actually raised capital. I can't easily check if they're profitable. I can use Companies House, but people can fit it on Companies House, right? So you get the general idea. So funding is a good proxy, but just because you raise loads of money doesn't actually necessarily mean you've got a good company. So seed-strapping is another thing, right? Of like, you can think about it as like, if I raise one big round, how to use that money as effectively as possible so I don't need to raise more money in the future. So those are three things there. On the negative side, and this is something which to be very wary of in terms of the news and things that are happening, is that what we're now seeing is all these AI companies who are supposedly on like how many millions of ARR like every year. What they're doing is more complicated than that. So generally they're charging on a monthly basis and they're extrapolating that to annual revenue. And obviously a big danger there is that of churn. So churn is where somebody might get a subscription monthly, doesn't mean they're going to still be paying a year's time. And what's happening for a lot of these AI companies is that companies are getting the software for 2-3 months and then they're not renewing and they're getting big discounts at the beginning. But a lot of large companies, what they're saying is, oh, we've got 100 million ARR. But it's not like the reality is a lot of that money isn't actually there and they can't really bank on that revenue hitting their accounts. So it's something to be very wary of when you're comparing yourself to other people. It can seem like, oh, you're doing so badly because all these people are getting so many millions of ARR. But it's not necessarily the case. You've got to be kind of smart about that so you don't put yourself down about when you're comparing to other people.
Have you heard of the elephant company?
And the elephant company.
Yeah, I was reading an article recently where not everyone's trying to build a unicorn company. Some people are trying to build an elephant company, and I guess that's kind of what VHQ is. I don't know if you're looking at it, like a very community. I don't know how to explain it well, but I need to go back and read that article again. But it sounded really interesting. I thought you might know about an elephant company.
So the funny thing is, there's always like new things that pop up.
Yeah.
So like zebra companies, there's like this company, there's that company. So I can't always keep up, but one thing you see about BHQ is that people will like consider us a startup, and like BHQ is not a startup in my eyes. But people think like, oh no, but you are, and it's a weird thing about wanting to be identified as a startup.
Yeah.
And if you're not a startup, don't identify as a startup because then you can use the right tactics that are good for you. Like BHQ does not have.
How would you explain it? How would you explain what BHQ is? What company structure it is? Yeah.
It's a small business essentially, right? And there's this. Underneath the covers, there's a CLG and there's CLS. We've got multiple companies, one impact company and one for-profit company, and different things go in different places. But in the general gist of things, it's a small business and it doesn't have a repeatable revenue model. So it's not like we sell software where we have like this many subscriptions. What we have is more the sponsorship side. We have like books and things like that. But I can't be like, oh yeah, we're going to get to 10 million revenue next year because we don't have a mechanism that scales in that way. And we're not building in that way. So we couldn't raise venture capital because there's no route for us to say, oh, I'm going to get 100 million like ARR. But the challenge is that sometimes people want to call themselves a startup and say it's fine for a small business. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. And what we're focused on who are serving is startups because we can specialize in that area. But it doesn't mean a small business is bad. And often the small businesses are the ones actually making money and paying themselves, where startup founders can be a lot more difficult. Like, a startup, you should be doing it because you're obsessed with the problem or you're obsessed with the difficulty of doing it. And it's a really difficult thing because like people get offended when you say like they're not a startup. It's like there's no like being a startup doesn't make you whole now, right?
I don't understand how startups got so fantasized and everyone's obsessed with it, and it's how did that happen?
But you say that it's in our bubble. Most people don't care.
Yeah.
Like if you think about the average person, like 3 years ago, before I started doing this stuff, I didn't know what a startup was. I couldn't explain what venture capital was. And it's all of them. I said, like, don't create a startup to be cool because most people don't even know what it is. Like, they're not going to be impressed. And like, they're going to be more impressed by like how you treat people and like whether you're nice. And it's very easy to get down this thing of what the algorithm is going to show you is every reason in startups. Reality is like very few people in the UK are actually building startups. It's a very tiny percentage. And for example, me having to explain what I do to the average person, you do see me like struggling and like they feel like, oh, what do you do? And then I explain them like, oh, cool. So how do you make money? It's like, oh God, like I don't want to sit here and explain it. And that's the thing. It's like, it's not just something where you can say like, oh yeah, and this, and this, and you're like, oh wow, oh my God, you're a founder. Like, and they're just gonna like fawn over you. Like nobody cares that much, right? And the sooner you can get over yourself, the sooner you can focus on what's important. Okay, basically why we're building it, so we want to make a difference for that community, right? And like, if I was doing it for fame and all that stuff, like it's just not that important to me. And again, that mindset comes from the grief. And that's the complicated thing. Like I have all the complicated emotions about it, right? But there are people who are building a startup because they're trying to fill a hole in themselves, where it's about proving it to their parents didn't believe in them, or like this girl dumped them when they were 15 or whatever it is, right? Like I need to prove them wrong. Like I'm going to be successful. It's like you can't live your life with that like black hole in you, right? It's like you've got to be doing it from. Is it, are you running away from something or are you running towards something, right? And as you can see from some of the billionaires in this world, is that you can go very far by like running away from something or trying to impress people. And like it's not mentioning any names, but there's some people who are very immature who are running very, very large companies. And they're led by the insecurity and it's taken them very far. But are they happy? Is that the kind of life you want to live? Do you want to be like them? I don't.
And we spoke about this on the last podcast, how actually a lot of the people who've made it are actually unhappy with what they've built and, don't know what to do with their lives now.
It's one of those weird things as well. Like, to get to a certain level, you can be led by the joy of things and things like that. But to get to an extreme level of wealth, it's like, what keeps you still going at that point?
Yeah.
Is it just sheerly like you need to be the richest person in the world? You want is it ego? And this is where you have to come back to the problem. I think that's what keeps you sane. Because amongst all the success and all the fancy lights and I spoke at the House of Lords, it's like, what does that matter if I'm not actually helping people?
Yeah.
And to me, the biggest thing about the House of Lords event wasn't that like, oh, we had this person speak, that person speak. It was that 17-year-old speaking up on stage that we made the difference to her summer. And like, even as I say it, I feel like a bit like, it kind of like makes me go, right? Because that's a bit that like, if I think about that, my dad and what stuff, right? That's a bit my dad would be proud of. Like, he wouldn't care that I did this fancy stuff. He would be caring about like, I've actually helped some people from an underrepresented background, people who are struggling, or people who maybe don't get the opportunity. That's what I feel the best about, that I'm actually doing something good amongst all the praise and all the people maybe like saying nice things about me.
Yeah. I think at the end of it, it's all about finding your purpose. And I know we had a really good question also that was asked by the audience, which was, how do you find your sense of purpose? Which is a very deep question. We are running out of time, but if you want to leave us with some few words.
I think the biggest thing is just experiment, and also not to put so much pressure on it. I'm a complete fluke, right? None of this was planned out. I didn't have this grand ambition. It was just like a series of like random opportunities. I started writing online this New Year's resolution that then triggered all this path. I didn't set this out 5 years ago. And like even the stuff we're doing now, and me doing different things and experimenting, opportunities are coming to us. And then someone like, oh, that sounds good, let's do this, right? But it's so easy to think about if their life planned out. And I know so many founders, very few of them are like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And they just went and did it. And when you try to make that perfect path in life, you're just putting pressure on yourself. Just like try things out, just see if it works. If you enjoy it, keep doing it. If you don't enjoy it, stop doing it. And if you live life that simply, I think you're going to get to a pretty good place. Whereas if you try so hard to like find the perfect thing, often like it's not going to be perfect. And as I said earlier, it's like no matter how much you enjoy what you do, there's going to be days which are just shit. But if you think, oh, as soon as I have a shit day, this is my purpose. I've got to change path because it's supposed to be like I'm walking on clouds. But life isn't like that, right? You've got to have the ups and downs, and the downs will make the ups meaningful, right? If you only ever had good days, you wouldn't even be able to appreciate it properly.
That's so true. Well, thank you so much for doing this with us.